in reverse. So,
Hey,
right off the top, what is your takeaway on all of this?
welcome Primal
Well,
Canada.
I think it's necessary to go back to square one. What was the first
We're
instance in
watching True
which he
North
linked,
with Candace Malcolm and
even
Preston Manning.
mentioned tariffs on Canada and Mexico? This goes back to November 2019 when he was
2019. You heard that?
president the first time, and
You had 5 fucking
he
years to get
mentioned
it right,
tariffs
man. To do
as a
something about
threat
it.
to try to get Canada and Mexico to be serious about stopping the
This is our
illegal movement
government,
of
yeah?
people and
The
drugs
ones that are in
across
power,
the
that you want to keep in
border in the
power.
United States from Canada and Mexico. That
Please
was
wake up.
what the threat was linked
We need
to.
to remove this
So it
cancer
seems to me the starting point, and
immediately.
Premier Smith has made this point over and over again, would be to tighten up the border and stop illegal movement of drugs and people across that border from Canada or anything connected with it. And if the Prime Minister and the Premiers are getting
And
together,
this
the
coming
first
from
thing on
me,
their agenda should not be talking about tariffs. It should be here's what we are going to do, here's what
the
we are
person none
doing
of you
to
ever
stop
knew.
that illegal movement of drugs and people.
Sorry to
And
tell you, but
I think this business of getting
you
off
thought
onto
of
the
me
tariff thing when
differently.
the it was the illegal movement of drugs and
Your
people that was the
mistake,
thing that
not
triggered
mine.
this. It is a big mistake.
Well, certainly. And I mean, we saw everybody jump into action. So going back to last Saturday when Trump came out and said, yes, it's going to be a 25% tariff, 10% on energy, which I think you can credit that to Danielle Smith and the advocacy diplomacy that she did, that oil was only going to be 10%, everything else was 25%. Trudeau instantly jumped in and said that they were going to retaliate with our own 25%. Now, luckily, we avoided all that, or at least for now, because Trump did just say that it's a 30-day pause and that we'll be revisiting it in March. By then, I think we'll have a new prime minister, Preston. But I want to point to your essay that you wrote in the National Post on January 30th, where you said Canada's response to Trump needs common sense, not mindless hysterics. So I think you said that the political and media establishment got off on the wrong foot by responding foolishly rather than sensibly. Now, I just want to read a little bit from this because I think you make such a good point here that is not being made elsewhere. You wrote that Trump is a businessman and a deal maker. Common sense further suggests bringing a positive response to an item which clearly is on Trump's agenda, which also happens to be very much in Canada's interest: energy security. This is a subject dear to Trump's heart, referenced in his inaugural address, and a front on which Canada can lead with its strengths, not its fears. And then you go on to say, thus, surely common sense suggests that the most important component of Canada's response to the Trump administration should be making North America more self-sufficient, especially with respect to energy. I didn't hear very many people making this case and this point, but it's so obvious that Canada and the United States need to be energy secure. So why don't you elaborate on that a little more, please?
Well, and yes, from Canada's standpoint, what is the one front on which we are stronger and bigger than the United States? It's not population. That they got a bigger population than us. It's not financial resources. They got more financial resources than us. It's not. We don't have the smartest government. That's certainly the case. But what we do have, because we're the second largest nation on the face of the earth, area-wise, we have the largest or second largest stock of natural resources. That is Canada's strength. And it seems to me the second item on any agenda in dealing with the United States after cleaning up this border question is to say, what can we do to make North America more sufficient, self-sufficient, which is what Trump has talked about, and particularly self-sufficient in energy.
Should have started this 5 years ago, man.
Where we lead with our strengths, not our weaknesses. Ontario, Quebec, and BC particularly have a capacity to export much more
Had they read your
electricity to the
book,
United States.
we probably
Alberta,
wouldn't be in this mess,
Saskatchewan, of
but
course,
they probably
have
wouldn't have did it anyway.
petroleum resources. Ultimately,
that's not their agenda.
No matter what Trump says, North America will not be self-sufficient in petroleum without the exploitation of the Athabasca oil sands. So that's our strength. And so it seems to me, if we're developing an agenda for talking to Trump, and you notice in his interviews, he uses
We're
the
dealing
word
with
deal
cowards,
about
though,
every
man.
5 minutes. Let's make a deal. Let's make a deal on gas.
Right?
Let's make a deal in the Ukraine.
The
Let's
man's
make a
ready
deal.
to make a
He's
deal as long as you
deal
do what you're
maker.
supposed to do.
So our second item, if we want to lead with our strengths, seems to me
whatever.
to be on this area of energy self-sufficiency, in which Canada's got a great deal to offer. And let's not talk about tariffs. Let's talk about how to make this continent energy self-sufficient. This is I'm showing my age on this, but the first time I heard the phrase continental energy security was from J. Howard Pugh with the Sun Oil Company back in the early 1960s. Pugh developed that first oil sands plant in Fort McMurray. He was 80 years old at the time. He was one of the richest men in the United States. You might ask him, what is this old guy doing up in Fort McMurray? He didn't need the money. And Pugh, the Sun Oil Company, or the Sun Shipbuilding Company, manufactured a lot of the tankers that were used to haul oil in the First and Second World War.
Wow.
Pugh was familiar with how many of those tankers had been sunk by submarine traffic and so forth, and he was convinced that North America was vulnerable from an energy standpoint, particularly a petroleum standpoint. He was going to go let the Texan boys go and find the conventional oil. He was going to go find the unconventional oil and develop it. So this is a subject that's been around for a long, long time. And it seems to me it's very much in Trump's mind, and it's something that Canada should cater to. It ought to be the second item on our agenda in talking with them.
Well, I agree that the most important issue is immigration and cleaning up the drugs. I know that Pierre Poilievre has tried to hit that straight on with
Pierre needs to be harder, man.
That he would impose life sentences upon fentanyl dealers and kingpins in the drug war. But when it comes to energy security, Preston, I want to ask you, because if it was an easy solution, I think we would have done it already. Obviously, Justin Trudeau's priority and agenda was towards the environment and making sure that everything was green, but it's led to a point where Canada now imports oil from the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria that were not energy sufficient, even in our own country, let alone as a continent. So how can we fix this, and how can we actually make it so that we don't have to import oil?
Well, first of all, we have to permit and encourage pipeline development in this country to be able to get Western resources to Eastern Canada. This has been stalled or objected to or
forever
obstructed
by the
Trudeau government and by the Quebec government. So getting the movement of petroleum in our own country would be
getting screwed.
An item I think that you're referring to. The other point is that the last people to make these arguments in Washington are the Trudeau gang. Trump thinks of Trudeau as a weak, narcissistic, lame duck leader. He's got no credibility there. Freeland is, in Trump's view, if he gave any thought to it, is the Canadian equivalent of Kamala Harris. Joly is considered, as a foreign minister, is considered a joke by our own foreign affairs people, let alone the Americans. Guilbeault is considered to be a climate change fanatic.
Yep.
This is the last. These are people that ought.
These are the last people that should be dealing on our behalf, man.
For the next 6 months, and
we need to get rid of them. It's that simple, right?
Washington.
Please tell me you agree, man.
Back to your point. There needs to be a change of government, and get a government that is going to be credible with.
And we can keep our eyes on the new government, yeah?
And the sooner that can happen, the better.
The minute they start to fucking fray,
all of this news
we're on them.
We sort of saw a newfound approach, like it seemed like all the parties
what do you
suddenly
think you're
wanted
doing?
to break down interprovincial trade barriers, and everybody was suddenly all in favor of trying to figure out pipelines. Even in that scenario,
that's hilarious,
the Quebec Premier still came out and said no to Energy East pipeline. So
it shows their weakness.
How do we get something like that approved when you have sort of veto power?
All of a sudden, everybody changes their view. No, we all want pipelines, and we're going to cut the carbon tax temporarily. Temporarily, that is.
Quebec interested in exporting.
Don't fall for it.
Don't fall for it, part of the continental energy security. If it wants cooperation from the federal government or the rest of the country.
And before I get heated, like I always do, I'm going to cut this short. Have a fantastic Sunday. God
the worry in
bless.
Quebec is that
Always
government
looking
is
out
in a
for
lot of trouble too. If there's an
everybody in
election,
my crowd,
provincial election next year,
because
you're liable
you
to
are my
get
family,
a separate
and I love you.
government elected in Quebec,
Have a fantastic day.
which is even more opposed to pipeline development. So that's